Well, good morning. And thank you for attending the last of the seminar series from the College of Ag. Thank you very much for all of you who've attended all of them and have had great questions for the participants. And all of you who have been speakers or panelists in this series, because I really think across the college we have learned a lot about what each other does and where big bets or big future bets might be. So today is the last, as I mentioned, and just to show you that they truly are here, is the Soil and Crop Sciences Department, and they will be talking to us on sustaining food, water, and energy resources under changing climate and land uses. And the panel today will start out with Francesca Kretruffel and Stephen Fonte and Scott Haley and Megan Shapinski.
Thank you all for being here. More than anything, thank you for our great leadership that organized this event, right? It's been really helpful for all of us to know more about what we do in our departments and all the great research that we do, and I believe that it will help a lot to foster even more our collaborations. Are you hearing well? So, today I'm going to start the presentation on the research at our Department of Soil and Crop Science, and I'm Francesca Cotrufo. I'm a soil ecologist here in the department, as well as a senior scientist at the Natural Resource Ecology Lab, and with me there will be Steve Fonte, Scott Haley, and Megan Shipansky. What a great time to be working in ag, right? We have maybe the biggest challenge ever. We have to provide food to a growing population that in 2050 is not even 30 years, a little bit more than 30 years from now, and will be almost 10 billions. And that's really maybe the biggest challenge. But on top of that, we not only have to provide food, but we have to grow that food with using energy more efficiently, because also the energy demand will increase, and a larger amount of that energy will have to be produced with clean renewable sources that compete, whether it is wind or solar or biofuels. They will compete with food production for land and water resources. And all that will happen at a time when actually our water resources is becoming scarcer, and that will pose another additional challenge on food production, in particular because one of the areas where we produce majority, a large share, about 40% of global food, comes from irrigated land. And so having less water to irrigate our land will be really a big challenge that we have to address, in particularly in areas like here in Colorado that we really define as semi-arid. And on top of that, the climate is changing. It's already started to change, and we are experiencing that in many growing season already. Globally, the world is becoming warmer, and that will increase evapotranspiration and impose stress on crops. But also precipitation events will come with different patterns and are predicted to come with more extreme patterns, so more extensive drought, as well as possibly some more flooding events. And that is predicted to really stress crop production worldwide with climate change. So how to frame all this? Maybe we can say that we are navigating into a perfect storm. On one hand, we have to meet an increased demand in food and energy, but we have to do that with less water. And that will really require science-based knowledge on how to optimize all those resources and really still be able to produce safe and healthy food for the world. And we need to do that while adapting and mitigating to climate change. And in the Department of Soil and Crop Science, that's what we do, that's what we like to do, and we do that from studying the basic in the soils and moving up to the genetics of plants, and at the system level, proposing agroecosystem that possibly can do all that, finally all the way up to modeling and metrics. And again, we really like to embrace this challenge to optimize the resources uses for crop and biofuel production. And this huge challenge cannot be done alone, right? We really cherish our strong collaboration network with all of you guys in the College of Ag, but also we are strongly involved at CSU in many initiatives. Most recently, the Innovation Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Several of us are also scientists at the NREL, part of SOGES, the Energy Institute, the Water Institute, but also going up to national and worldwide. We really collaborate with a lot of different centers and initiatives, and have often federal funding to do that. But what we care the most is to have an impact with our research, and for sure our first stakeholders are our students, and we do transfer the knowledge that comes from our research to, first of all, undergraduate and graduate students. Also, we organize something that is very precious to me, and I have slides afterwards, that the Summer Soil Institute that Jean Kelly, the second picture here, talking to a lot of students from all over the world that come here to learn about our soils. We do work in schools. This is a high school and for college where we're showing how to measure soil respiration, but also a lot of our work, and there's some work from Jessica Davis, teaching actually to kids all over the world, and bringing out our research to everybody that can learn from it. And other key stakeholders for us are, of course, the producer. And again, I want to enforce that we not only do outreach and an extension to the farmers that are here in Colorado, but a lot of our initiatives span all over the world. And again, the bottom figures are something from Africa and the Southeast Asia. But we also work in Africa and in many other places. Finally, actually not yet finally, but one thing that I'm really proud of is that really we have a significant scholarly excellence in what we do, and we permeate that to the society for which we are members, and through the organizational conferences, and contributing to a lot of the editorial board of journals and so forth. So I think that we really impact our peers with our research, and for sure, last but not least, we are having more and more of an impact in the industry out there. We are collaborating with that. We are providing solutions, and actually, as I will show a minute later, there are some colleagues of us that are starting companies from our science knowledge. So I'll now change pace and go back to our research areas, and that's where the four of us will be giving you more of an insight in what we do in all of those, and I will now start with soils. And of course, if you ask a soil ecologist, the secret is in the soil, right? We can do it all by working on soils, and when we want to solve problem in soils, we really have to make soils are like us, a living organism. We want to have them healthy. So really one of our focus in our research and a big bet would be the soil health for our department. We really contribute to the understanding and promotion of soil health through many different facets. We are very strong in organic matter research, and that's the work that Megan and Thomas, Kit Posian, and myself do. A pillar of soil health is an healthy biota, and that's the work that Matt Wallenstein, that is recently joined our department with joint position with the with ecosystem science and sustainability, and Mary Stromberger and Steve Fonte. But also, in ag, soils do suffer from the fact that we harvest the majority of the plant inputs. And so you can't really have an healthy soil in ag if you don't boost it. And so a lot of our research also goes into soil amendments, and that's the great work that for many here Barbaric has done on the on the soil, what do you call it? The biosolids, and again, myself more recently is working on biochar with many other colleagues in the department, and we'll talk even more later about the work of Jessica Davis on actually more organic amendments. And finally, a healthy soil has to have an healthy environment where we look at the contamination or the effect of climate change on soils, and that's the work that Jean Kelly and Thomas Borsch and Greg Butters do more on the soil environment. But let's start from the organic matter. Really, we have advanced science on our soil organic matter, and that's some of the earlier work that Keith Posian and his student at the time, Johan Six, do, understanding the aggregate dynamic. In agriculture, the formation and dynamics of aggregates are key for the not only for the recycling, but also for the maintenance of soil organic matter in soils. And they really break the ground with showing how tillage management, for example, can impact the formation and persistence of aggregate in soils. And another key theory that came out of them was the carbon saturation theory. Understanding carbon saturation is key to manage our soil for carbon sequestration, and therefore having an idea of what control carbon saturation as really being helpful in advancing all the carbon sequestration science. And we are at the time where we are changing we have changed our understanding of how soil organic matter persists in soils, and in that the organo-mineral interaction have been shown as the most important mechanism by which we can preserve organic matter and carbon in soils. And the work that Thomas Borsch has done to highlight those interactions, in particular with the importance of iron oxides, has also been very important in the sector. And more recently, myself and Matt Wallenstein and others, we have proposed a shift in the paradigm of how soil organic matter form from plant decomposition. And actually what we might have read in textbooks that humus is formed from recalcitrant organic matter. We now think the humus doesn't exist in soils, and that actually the most stable organic matter that comes from mineral association actually might come from the most labile plant material. And that really has provided a paradigm shift and a lot of attention after that. But also this paradigm highlights the importance of microbes, and not only in the transformation of soils, but some of the work that, again, Mary and Matt do in our department really look at how we can manage microbes to stimulate plant growth. And Mary, for example, is working on mitigating water stress in wheat, and how microbes can help that. And as I was telling you before, Matt really brought this to a different level, and working on microbes that can solubilize phosphorus and make it more available to plant growth, started a company, Growsensia, that now is selling this product. And just yesterday I went home with some wonderful tomatoes that they grew in our growing chamber. But again, going back to the organic amendments, we do need to boost our soils, and now a lot of attention is going to biochar. And there is a lot of talk on campus about the nexus between energy, water, and food, and I can think that if there is one thing that is really at the center, it's biochar. It's a bioproduct of energy production. It actually increases water holding in the soil, as well as might stimulate fertility. And we are doing a lot of very very interesting research on biochar, also in partnership with several companies here in Colorado and in California. And that is becoming an area where many of us are researching, and I believe that will keep going for quite some time in the future. But again, a healthy soil has to be clean, right? And a lot of the operations that are coming in this area from hydraulic fracturing are really pose a challenge on that. And that's the work that Thomas Bosch is doing, looking at the contamination of water for fracturing and how that will affect also our soils. And going back to climate change again, the climate change is going to pose a huge stress on our soils. And Jean Kelly did a great reconstruction with his students of the effect of the recent climates on soils, and showed how already some of the soils are really suffering from some extreme aridity. The red spots, you can see a lot of them in this picture. We couldn't do that without great facilities. And we manage the soil, water, and plant testing lab when Jim Self did an amazing job at making all this, the facilities run and provide service not only to us and our students, but also to a lot of growers and landscapers and so forth. And in the Natural Resource Ecology Lab, we also manage the EcoCore analytical facilities. That is a shared CSU facility where we do additional isotope and also molecular and analytical lab. And that, I think, is really important for us in the soil, but also the water sector, to have access to state-of-the-art facility. Allow me to have this picture. I really love the Soil Summer Institute, and I think it gives an example of how the scholarly excellence that we have in soils, together with the colleagues in the Natural Resource Ecology Lab and in biology, those kids come from all over the world and pay every summer to listen to us, because we can give them a comprehensive understanding of the soils, of all the aspects. And actually this year, the theme of the Soil Summer Institute is going to be soil health. So with all this in mind, I believe the soil health gives great opportunities to us. I think we have demonstrated scholarly excellence in many different aspects of soil science that contribute to soil health. And there is a growing opportunity out there. There are a lot of funding opportunity. There are even from the corporate world that want to work on soil health, and some of them don't even know what they're talking about. They don't even know what it is. And so the fact that here we have all this expertise to really delve into it, we can lead science-driven solutions that focus all on food production, on mitigating climate change, promoting the soil biodiversity, and also, of course, enhancing the safety of our environment where we human live, and so also human safety. And with that, I pass the floor to Scott.
So I don't know, should this one be on or off, or? Okay. Well, I'm Scott Haley, for those of you who don't know me, and appreciate Francesca and all the work that the others on the panel have done in putting this together. So Francesca led off with this notion that the secret is in the soil. I'm here to tell you that actually the secret is in the genes. And if we look back at productivity increases, and I think Francesca did a really good job laying out the challenges for us moving into the next 35, 40 years and feeding 9.7 billion people, if we look at past productivity advances, 50% or more of that has come from breeding and genetics, locally as well as globally in all different parts of the world. So this is the part that I'm going to talk to you about here over the course of the next few minutes. Our team in the area of crop genetics in the Soil and Crop Sciences Department can be roughly divided between three main areas. The first would be trait or gene discovery, and Pat Byrne is on our faculty in Soil and Crop Sciences, along with our newest faculty member, Stephen Pierce. And then Adam Huberger is, his primary home department is in horticulture and landscape architecture, but he has a joint appointment in our department. On the Cultivar Development side, Mark Brick and myself lead the two Cultivar Development programs that we have in soil and crop sciences. And then the last part that you see down there at the bottom is in the area of crop variety testing. Jerry Johnson leads our efforts based at CSU in crop variety testing. And then the other two individuals who you may not know are Abdel Barada, and who's at Yellow Jacket in southwest Colorado, and Calvin Pearson, who's at Fruta near Grand Junction. So it's a very diverse set of individuals doing work all the way from the area of gene discovery and functional genomics all the way to doing field trials with sunflowers. And so while it is very diverse, we're also very well connected, I believe, and I hope to make that case for you today. So starting off first in the area of trait or gene discovery, Pat Byrne is leading an effort within our department in collaboration with Kansas State University in a project funded by the National Science Foundation to try to mine the germplasm resources that we have in wheat in particular. Can't really see it too well on that photo on the left, but that is Aegilops tauschii, which is one of the wild wheat relatives of our common domesticated wheat. And that project endeavors to mine those genetic resources for traits that are of use to us in productivity or disease resistance. Where Pat's really focusing in on is looking at root traits. And you see there over on the left is kind of our common adapted winter wheat variety in terms of its rooting pattern and rooting depth and root mass and so forth. And then the one on the right is a wild accession. And so the challenge here is to try to identify those genes underlying that characteristic and get those genes into something where producers can benefit from that. Stephen Pierce, as I indicated, is our newest faculty member, just joined us here about a month ago. And Stephen is working in a variety of different areas. One of the really neat ones that he'll be working with is in something called exome capture. And exome, the X part, stands for expressed. And you see over there on the, if there was a pointer, I'll just kind of wave my hands here. But that big blue circle represents the size of the wheat genome, 17 billion base pairs, the most complicated crop genome that we know of, using technologies related to sequencing and so forth. That can be whittled down to something that's much more manageable, and it indicates there about 112 megabases. And using sequencing technologies and other tools, variants for key genes underlying important traits can be identified, characterized, and then hopefully from our perspective in breeding transferred to varieties that have some bearing for wheat producers out in the real world. One really interesting part of that is looking at genes that underlie the development of yield. And this slide shows the developmental sequence of the wheat plant. Early in the developmental cycle, essentially the length of the wheat head and how many different kernels are put on that wheat head is determined by the environment, determined by genetics. And Stephen's work endeavors to try to identify those genes, identify useful mutants for that, perhaps manipulate them to the benefit of applied crop production. So the last thing that I'd like to mention is that of the work that Adam Huberger does. And Adam is a real whiz in this area of metabolomics, which makes the connection then all the way from genomics to expression of the genes, expression of the genes and the RNA into protein, to production of small molecules. And as I understand it, that's the whole area of metabolomics. Essentially, this makes the connection all the way from the genotype of the plant to a phenotype that we can detect in terms of small molecules, which are detected with mass spectrometry and so forth. So Adam is using these technologies in a variety of different areas in wheat, looking at trying to identify genes that underlie flavor or aroma profiles, and that's of real interest for our industry partner, Ardent Mills. And then also a collaboration with Anheuser-Busch to try to develop better beer. Okay? So that's the area of trait and gene discovery, again, focused on tool and trait development. So the next one is cultivar development, and that's the part that I'm a little more familiar with. As I indicated before, we have 2 applied breeding programs in our department. Wheat is the one that I lead, and then dry edible beans, which is the one led by our esteemed Dr. Brick. And the first thing that all breeders, regardless of the crop, work on is yield improvement. And we've talked about that already, but It's also important to point out that we can develop the best disease resistance, the best quality, and whatever, but if that variety does not show some promise of greater productivity at the farm level, the producer will not accept that new variety, will not adopt that variety. So over the years, on that top graph, you can see that we've made gains here in Colorado in our program, myself and our predecessors and our overall team, in a very stressful environment. And then also the same with beans. The thing that I'd like to point about the bean story is a lot of that has come, and this is kind of a general theme across plant breeding, with changes that have occurred on-farm management with regards to harvesting equipment. There's a need to straight cut or direct cut beans. And so Mark Brick over the years has developed a new kind of bean plant that favors that sort of harvesting operation a little bit better than the kinds of beans that were grown in the past. So the next part that I think all breeders work on is the area of pest resistance, and this list for all breeders is generally long, at least in the case of Mark and our program. It's a long list and it never gets any shorter. So the picture on the right is of bean rust, and these photos are a little washed out here, sorry about that. And then stripe rust on the upper left, and then this new pest that Courtney talked about in the first of these seminars, the wheat stem sawfly. So why do breeders work on these things? It's essentially to try to maintain the productivity at the farm level, reduce the cost of production for the farmers, and then also reduce pesticide use. And it's a constantly evolving situation. As the breeder develops a new variety or deploys a new gene for resistance, the pest or the pathogen oftentimes will work. They're working harder than we are to try to overcome what we've done. A lot of what we do in both of our programs in that area involve collaborations with others in our college that you heard from BSPM, as well as collaborations with others. So the last part of this is end-use quality, and I could, from our own part in wheat breeding, we could give a seminar that's an hour long on the details of wheat quality. But suffice to say that the products, the commodities that producers produce need to be marketed. They need to go into a marketing infrastructure by an end-use industry, and not all wheat varieties and not all bean varieties are the same. So we work on that very hard in wheat breeding. The example that you see down there on the bottom is a new kind of bean variety that Dr. Brick and his team have developed, where the pinto bean doesn't darken as much over time, and that favors its use both in dry pack as well as canned operations, canning sorts of applications. The Crops for Health logo that I've included there is a long story in and of itself, but in addition to conventional commodity-based kinds of quality things that we work on, we're also working to identify traits or characteristics in wheat or beans or other crops that may favor their use or application to promote human health. And so that's a really important part of our program also. Intrinsic to these efforts in crop breeding is exposing students, undergraduate students and graduate students, to hands-on, providing them hands-on experiences. Over the last several decades, as plant breeding has moved more and more into the private sector, we still need to maintain a public sector emphasis so that we can train the next generation of plant breeders. And so we provide opportunities in the field, in the lab, exposing students to new technologies. This is a picture of one of our graduate students, Craig Bile, collecting data on the height of the wheat plant and using that to kind of convey the idea about data and data management. The next diagram there represents DNA sequences. The data that we're having to manage in our plant breeding programs now is nothing like we had in the past. And we're able to expose the students to this, show them how we do it, and in turn, they oftentimes help us implement new tools in our programs. The last thing that I'd like to highlight in this area is our involvement in CSU in a couple of national efforts. The Tridice CAP program, under Pat Burns' leadership, we've been involved in that here for quite some time at CSU, and then also the Bean CAP. The Borlaug Training Foundation is something that I'm involved with, and this is a joint project with CIMMYT and other partners to try to help development and training of mid-level agricultural technicians and technical support in developing countries. Okay, so crop testing is the last part that I'd like to talk about here, and I've got a couple of photos there of the teams that do this. Is Jerry Johnson and his team based out of CSU, and then Calvin Pearson and Abdel Barada at the out-campus sites in western Colorado. You see the list of crops that they've worked with currently or over the years. It's a pretty long list, and whenever there's a new crop to be evaluated, I certainly expect in the not-too-distant future, hemp will be a part of their repertoire there. So the work that they do provides a critical service to crop producers throughout Colorado in the conduct of science-based experiments under real-world conditions to develop the data infrastructure to help provide guidance to producers as they try to make their variety selection decisions. Intrinsic to this is the partnerships that the crops testing programs maintain and balance and cultivate with private industry, many private developers of crop cultivars, other universities, as well as many of the commodity groups that support our research. And I'm not saying anything about that all here today, but in particular, the wheat group has been just tremendous supporters of our research in terms of wheat breeding, but also in terms of crop testing, because the producers are really interested in maintaining that capacity. Intrinsic to the conduct of the variety trials is what I'm calling here stakeholder engagement. And for me, and I think for Jerry, I'm not seeing Jerry in the room, but this is really the funnest part of it. And I can't tell you all the things that I've learned over the years at field days. There's a photo there of President Tony Frank, director of the wheat growers, a couple of researchers, speaking with a farmer about what their concerns are on farm. And bringing that information then back to the university is extremely important. On the right there is a picture of a county agent working with a wheat producer in what's called on-farm testing. And that's a really fun activity. Through the Colorado Association of Wheat Growers, I've been involved with the Bennett Gardner Wheat Tour. Before Corey Gardner was there was somebody else. But this is an informational opportunity interfacing with people at the Akron Research Station to provide information to policymakers about what's important in the area of agricultural research. And then lastly, these crop variety trials provide a forum, actually, for addressing critical needs. And that's a picture of Frank Piers addressing producers in the New Raymer area about this new wheat stem sawfly situation. And then we also spend a lot of time with meetings that we have in August working with producers in what we call planting decision meetings. So I'd like to close here by just summing up what we believe are our opportunities in this area of crop genetics. And I've got these labeled as 1A and 1B because I feel that they're part and parcel of one another. And the first is what we would call capacity maintenance. And what I mean about that is maintaining a capacity in the public sector for plant breeding in crops so that we can participate in training the next generation of plant breeders. But in that process, engaging with stakeholders and providing stakeholders something that they're not able to get from private industry. And we have an opportunity here in the not too distant future with a retirement in terms of continuing a dry edible bean breeding program. And this is not just a Colorado thing, this is a regional priority. And then another important crop that I think many of you are familiar with is millet. And this is a really important part of dryland cropping systems in eastern Colorado. And there's no private industry emphasis in this at all. And so connected with this is maybe what we could look at is in two perspectives. One is the research-based component of that, but then also a student training. And what we're saying here is leveraging crop germplasm. And we've depicted the our national gene bank, which is just not too far from here on the CSU campus. Leveraging genetic resources which are held in that gene bank with some of the new technologies that we've talked to you about for crop improvement and student training. And then again, making the connection between those things and improvements that are needed today and will be needed tomorrow in the areas of drought and heat stress tolerance. So with that, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Or to Steve.
Oh.
Okay, so
while I think both Francesca and Scott made a nice case for the importance of soils and crop genetics, I'm really here to convince you that the secret is really in the system. And how we can manage agroecosystems to ensure their overall performance and resilience in the face of climate change. And ultimately how we can contribute more to climate-smart agriculture, which is one of our big bets in our department, through helping farmers adapt to global changes as well as mitigate some of the causes of climate change. So within this area of agroecosystems, our department has sort of a number of different areas that are very relevant where we work. Working sort of in water use efficiency and water quality, we have Jay Ham and Troy Bowder, Alan Andales, and Reagan Wascombe. We also have in the area of more like nutrient use efficiency and sustainable management, Raj Khosla and Jessica Davis. And then also we can think more about cropping systems, which borders on sort of, or definitely includes sort of basic agronomy. We have Joe Brummer, Megan Shapansky. We could also include Jerry Johnson here and Kevin Larson. And then there's another component of agroecosystems that we don't necessarily manage for, at least not directly. And here I'm talking about overall agroecosystem biodiversity, where we have, I'll share some of the work of Arathi Shashadri, Sarah Ward, and myself. So when we're talking about water use efficiency and overall water quality, our department has very strong capabilities and are regional leaders in basically measuring water movement or water flux through agroecosystems. Some of the work of Jay Ham has been really important in developing low-cost sensors for looking at transpiration and sort of accounting for a per plant basis of water movement. This is work of Alan Andales and others looking at a plot scale where they've installed lysimeters in fields to look at how water is percolating down through soils and getting sort of a plot scale overall balance of water inputs and outputs through rainfall, irrigation, transpiration, evapotranspiration. And then at more of a farm scale, we can use remote sensing to also provide a boundary of water movements in this field. So this is just an image showing evapotranspiration across different regions of a farm. So once you can measure water well, I think then we can apply that, and it's essential in order to be able to manage it well. So a lot of people in our department are working on different strategies for limited irrigation, deficit irrigation. And the basic idea here is that if this is a crop response curve to water applied, and this is a relative yield, that it's sort of in crops, some crops will taper off like that a bit, and we can take advantage of that fact by lowering irrigation or the amount of irrigation water significantly. If you do it in a strategic way, it can result in just very minimal losses in yield. And so that's one strategy which is being studied to make better use of the limited water that we have. Also, I'll highlight some of Troy Bowder's work here, looking at how different management strategies, in this case tillage intensity, is affecting water movement and water quality across a field. So he's looking at how different types of tillage are influencing infiltration, as well as runoff and nutrient load at the end of the field. So this has important consequences for overall water use efficiency, what you're losing, as well as the nutrients in that water are affecting water quality, both in groundwater and potentially in streams down where those run off to. So tying into that, I mentioned a group of us, probably more than the two I showed, looking at strategic nutrient use in agroecosystems. And I should just mention that nitrogen in particular is one of the largest contributors to global warming from the agricultural sector anyway, in terms of the production, transport, and then eventual sort of deleterious losses of nitrogen once it's on the field. So we're looking for ways to improve the delivery and the synchrony of nutrient availability and plant uptake in the field so that we can ensure that crops are getting the nutrients they need while minimizing losses and specifically deleterious losses that are contributing to water quality issues and global warming. And this is through both sort of spoon feeding crops through fertigation technologies or more larger scale sort of precision agriculture, which really seeks to take into account variability within fields in terms of soil or different germplasms that are out there, and really apply the optimal amounts of nutrients in water. Our department also does work of looking at alternative nutrient sources. So here I'm going to highlight some work of Jessica Davis, where she's looking at cyanobacteria as a potential low carbon footprint nitrogen input that could be applied strategically to in fertigation and other ways to reduce the overall impact of nitrogen application in agriculture. Related to this, we're also looking at, I think there's a lot of potential in looking at waste streams from different industries. So we're in a part of the world where there's lots of livestock and lots of meat processing. So with those livestock, there's things like manure and bone meal, and we need to figure out how to use those inputs sustainably, and how to get the most benefit out of them, and with the least amount of environmental consequences. So I think another aspect of bringing together that efficient management of nutrients and of water, we need to think about whole cropping systems. We can't just think about one field at one time, but it's really this whole integrated system where we bring in different crops that maybe access the soil at different depths, or take advantage of the soil in different ways. And I think by looking at different cropping rotations and bringing in alternative crops, some of the ones that Scott mentioned, as well as forages or cover crops, we can really help diversify agriculture, potentially enhancing the stability of income to farmers, and having a lot of benefits for pest management as well as soil health. Another area I want to highlight is where I think we have sort of this strategic window we could come into right now is organic agriculture. There's definitely growing interest among students in our department with a organic agriculture concentration. It's one of the fastest growing concentrations in our department, or the fastest growing. And there's also a lot of interest from industry and from various producers who have expressed interest in engaging more with CSU in the development of cropping systems, organic cropping systems that are more sustainable and that take advantage of these different nutrient and water inputs. So one example that I think sort of brings together all of these different things I've been talking about is an experiment that's really been closely associated with our department for decades now. It's this Dryland Agroecosystems project. So it's basically takes place, that's on this far slide, across a precipitation of evapotranspiration gradient from north to south in eastern Colorado. And at each of these sites, we're testing different crop rotations. So we're looking at traditional wheat fallows, as well as looking at alternatives to that can better take advantage of the limited water that that falls in these dryland systems. So incorporating summer crops. And then this is also being done across different types of soils through a topographic gradient. So I think this is a really nice experiment, bringing together all the skills of the department where a lot of different people have been involved. So another sort of vision I see for our department is thinking in terms of how this farmer is managing different parts of his field and how they're able to bring together these different components of nutrients and water and rotations, and really manage their farmscape or their agroecosystem as one entire unit, and how they're really able to bring in technology through, for example, through GPS, so that they're able to, for example, in no-till, know where they're driving tractors and make the minimal impacts on soil. At the same time, we can bring in remote sensing technologies to get up-to-date ideas about or data on crop, water, and nutrient status. We can also bring in data layers on soil to really understand how we can get the most out of the nutrients and water, and what kind of germplasms we're seeding in different parts of the field and really optimize these agricultural systems at more of a landscape scale. So I think this nicely brings together or illustrates how we can bring together the crop and the soil and the water and nutrients and really tie this all together with having more data and technology to really have a more sustainable management of these agroecosystems. And then finally, I mentioned that there's a lot of things that we're intentionally managing on agricultural fields. But there's also a bit of things that are less directly managed, and I call this associated biodiversity. So specifically within our department, we have expertise in looking at pollinators, a range of soil organisms, weeds, and while these may provide a number of disservices, and they get more attention for that, they often provide a number of really important ecosystem services as well, related to production or carbon sequestration or the regulation of water or erosion control. And so I just mention these because without taking these different organisms into account, I feel that we're not able to fully understand and gauge the overall performance and sustainability of an agroecosystem. So, or 1B, oh, 1B, 1A. So I think really I've identified sort of two major opportunities that come out of this work. I think first, within our department, we need to reinforce our position as a regional leader in the efficient use, management, and measurement of water in the agricultural sector. And I think we already are a regional leader, and this is illustrated by, I don't know if it's been announced yet, but a recent grant to our department, to Megan Shapansky, is a multi-institutional grant to look at water management alternatives and sort of implications throughout the Ogallala Aquifer. And this is led by CSU, the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences. And then also going back to Francesca's slide earlier, where she showed sort of predicted impacts of climate change on crop stress or crop yields, I think that there's really a call for us to expand our capacities in collaborating with others as well, other departments and other institutions, to be able to fully assess agroecosystem performance. So going beyond simple yield and profit metrics and bringing in, looking at stability and resilience of agroecosystems, ecosystem services, biodiversity, and really getting at this climate-smart agriculture in the sense that we're able to both, mitigate global warming causes and help farmers adapt to new conditions. And I just want, I think we obviously have demonstrated that we have this capacity locally, but I think there's also a lot of potential for CSU and Soil and Crop to become an international leader in this climate-smart agriculture in terms of implementation, as well as just studying, how these systems work. So with that, I will turn it over to Megan.
So without understanding integration, you wouldn't know which comes first, the chicken or the eggs, or maybe how that relates to road crossings, right? Or another way to think about it is you could look at soils by themselves, you could look at crops by themselves, you could look at agroecosystems, but it's really these feedbacks and the integrations among these components. That's really what matters, right? So that's what I'm going to talk about, is some of the strengths we have moving forward around what I'm going to call sustainability metrics and forecasting. And I'm going to lump these in a few areas where we're working right now. First, ecosystem services. So what are the broader benefits that we get from agricultural systems beyond production? And that is work I'm working on, as well as Steve Fonte and Arathi Shashadri, looking at pollination services. And then I'll talk a little bit about some examples in air and water quality and metrics, and then talk about where we're really at the forefront looking at carbon and greenhouse gas metrics and modeling in particular. So ecosystem services gets buzzed around a lot, but it's really this question of we're asking more and more from our agricultural systems. Yes, we want them to yield, and we have pressure to increase crop productivity, but we're also trying to do it with reduced inputs, reduced environmental impacts. And in order to have this conversation, with producers or with the broader community, we have to think about multifunctionality of our cropping systems. And that's what I think of when I think of ecosystem services. So for example, this image here is from a farmer field day, and it's a great way to open the conversation where we have them evaluate different rotation systems, different management systems for their relative impacts on multiple outcomes. And so they're drawing spider plots on there, evaluating different systems. And it's a nice way to have that conversation about some of these interactions. We've also had them identify what should be on those plots in terms of what are the variables or outcomes that are most important to them. So that's one way. And then in terms of research, we can quantify some of this. So here's one example, work that Steve Fonte's been involved in, looking at ecosystem services provided by different cropping systems, especially focused on soil-based services, and the separation of some of the annual cropping systems from some of the more perennial-based systems in more tropical environments. And then moving forward to thinking about air quality and air metrics, I put this quote up here that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So we have a real forte in informing management of these shared resources through effective monitoring and then communicating that out to other audiences. So for example, there's many people that fit within this sort of air and water quality. I'm going to highlight some work by Jay Ham, where they've been working with feedlots. And so this involves a lot of integration with animal science, collaborations with a lot of it's focused on impacts on the national park, Rocky Mountain National Park. So looking at methane and ammonia, particularly ammonia emissions and nitrogen deposition issues. So we need to have some better metrics or monitoring of these environmental impacts of management systems so we can make effective policy and make effective changes in management. Another collaboration and talk in terms of integrating with industry. Their group is also working with Google, so using Google cars to try to quantify methane leaks in urban areas as a way to understand kind of the net effect of methane-based systems on greenhouse gases, and also looking at volatile organic carbon emissions from oil and gas fracking sites as well. And then moving into water use efficiency, Steve talked about how we're quantifying water use at the field scale. Alan Adalis and others have really been at the forefront in developing decision support tools around this. So they have this water irrigation scheduler for efficient application. Did I say that right? Water irrigation scheduler for efficient application, also known as WISE. That's what I always call it, WISE. And it both has a web-based platform, but now a handheld app, so that farmers can be in the field, pull in data from COAG-MET stations, so weather data, pull in soils data layers, and make decisions on the fly based on to optimize water use efficiency, and thereby reducing both water quality impacts, but also economic benefits back to the farmer in terms of productivity and wise water use. And then in the sort of soil carbon and greenhouse gas, the department has really been at the forefront with Keith Pastian's group, has developed a number of tools that have at the backbone our fundamental understanding, going back to what Francesca said, our fundamental understanding of how soil carbon and carbon works in our agricultural systems, and tying that into decision support tools around greenhouse gases. So the farm tool has been adopted by NRCS as a field farm scale assessment tool that's very user friendly. I've used it in my class for labs. It's a great teaching tool as well to get producers to be able to input what are their production practices, what might they change, and what's the relative impact of those different changes on greenhouse gases. So that's one tool. And then at the regional national scale, that same group provides spatially explicit estimates of greenhouse gas emissions to EPA, so informing our national greenhouse gas inventories from that research. And then also at the international scale, the CBP system is working with accounting of greenhouse gases in developing countries with the UN Environment Program. So this work starts at the backbone of understanding these fundamental processes of soil and crops, but then produces these usable tools that are science and data driven that can be used by the broader community. And these are having great impacts both in terms of the national greenhouse gas inventories, as I mentioned, also informing the IPCC guideline. That's why people in our department, as well as Natural Resource Ecology Lab, were part of the Nobel Peace Prize that was awarded to the IPCC. It's out of this work. also informing National Academy of Science reports, and numerous syntheses and assessments to policymakers. So it's sort of our outward-facing front. We interact with the systems-based tools at the farm scale, but it provides really usable tools at broader scales for policymakers and land managers as well. So if we think about opportunities coming from this, I think one of the keys are we have excellent backbones in terms of modeling and some of these decision support tools. Taking it to the next level, one area that we really see building from this is life cycle analyses and systems dynamics modeling. So some way to, as we look at all of these different management systems and whether it's organic or not organic, there are different drivers out there that industry and consumers and producers are increasingly wanting to quantify the net effects of the whole supply chain. And one way to do that is through these tools of life cycle analysis. And one beauty of this type of tool is it requires integration and collaboration with the economists and the social scientists and pulls it all together. So we see that as a real strength moving forward, that we can build on our current capacity and move into that area. And the other being this integration of big data and monitoring technologies, especially sensor technologies, into these decision support tools. Global wireless is coming. So as we get that, we have, and the sensor technologies are getting less and less expensive and more easily put out in broader regions of the world. So as we get that data, how do we integrate that monitoring into useful decision support tools moving forward? So here's an image that sort of tries to tie these pieces together. So this is focused on this soil carbon and greenhouse gas, but I think it goes across all of the different factors we've talked about in the seminar today, where we do very fundamental basic research, whether it's plant-soil microbiome interactions, soil carbon, crop genetics. We do inform that fundamental basic research. And then as a land-grant institution, we fit really well in providing that data-driven and transparent metrics and modeling tools moving forward. So quantifying that technology, developing better models and decision support systems, and then moving that into implementation, whether it's to policymakers or into private industry or into farmer production practices at the field scale. So if we're going to rise to this challenge of the perfect storm between water, energy, and food production, we think we're uniquely positioned within the context of climate change. We're uniquely positioned to do that through these three areas that we've outlined, both soil health, that great capacity we have around soil and soil organic matter, and climate-smart agriculture, and that integrating both the crop genetics as well as the systems-based management. And then building on top of that, the sustainability metrics and forecasting, looking at climate as we move forward and developing tools that will inform our management as we move forward. So I think these pieces together will allow us to address some of these challenges. And that's what we have. Thank you.
So this is a question for Scott or anybody else who wants to comment. Scott, I was very interested in your comment about millet. One of the interesting things about millet is, of course, that it does not have gluten, one of the problems with wheat, for some people anyway. And the other thing I was interested in was the lack of private interest in this. So if you can comment on those two things.
Well, don't get me going about the gluten part of that. But in terms of private investments, I guess I don't really have a firm sense. Is Jerry here by chance? I don't really have a good sense as to why that never was. I mean, probably farm commodity programs were tied to that in some way decades ago in terms of subsidies that the federal government gave to producers to produce it. Money, really. The companies just likely just see that they're not being an opportunity. Is this a problem? Clicking. Oh, just quit going.
You're wiggling it around too much.
No, I'm good. Okay. So companies just don't see themselves being able to make money back on it would be the bottom line for that. But Colorado is the #1 producer of millet in the country, actually.
Megan, I, of course, love the point about integration. So I'm wondering in that rapid, look through that, so I'm sure that I missed a lot of very important points, but I'm wondering what's the entry point for civil society into the tools that I think you showed really good examples of how it might be supporting producers and other parts of the value chain, internal parts. I'm wondering where civil society can meet that information in ways that are meaningful to, the community needs and aspirations of everyday citizens.
Is this working now? Okay. Yeah, I think any of these tool developments can have a variety of stakeholder input as they're developed. And so I think that is a key part of the original question, right? Is the community it's supposed to impact and how you bring these stakeholder groups together. And so I think Comet Farm has done quite a bit of stakeholder input in the development of that tool, for example. And that is more designed towards producers, so that's been more of that input community. But I could see as we move forward and look at some of these other things that those stakeholder groups would be at a more diverse and maybe community-based, depending on the tool that's being developed.
Hi, I have a question. I think this is probably mainly for Scott. My question is, I guess we've talked a little bit about the new focus on this small growing sector of organic ag, and I'm wondering if you see a need or have an opinion about organic breeding, and if you've had any talks or you get any feedback from growers, and what that might look like in the future.
The feedback that I'm getting, every year I get calls in August from, let's just say, a handful of producers wanting advice on which variety to plant under their organic conditions. And really that's only been like over the last couple of years. I've been here 17 years, and I'd say the first 13 or 14 of that I would never hear from any organic producers. So whatever I've heard has come about much more recently. In terms of the breeding side, for me, I've really, to be honest with you, I've kind of struggled with that from the sense of as breeders, we've thought we're already doing that, right? We're trying to develop crops that are resistant to pests, so the producer doesn't have to put a fungicide or whatever on. Quality, we've got this program. I didn't really discuss it here today, but this program with Ardent Mills, where they have a very specific end use profile in mind, and so the organic producer can grow that a couple of these certain varieties. I didn't do anything. But the producer can grow a couple of these hard white wheat varieties and then deliver them to Ardent Mills and get quite a significant premium for organic production. So I've felt for many years that we're already doing that, and maybe we're not. So the other part of that question, is there an interaction? And this is the basic thing that all breeders have to deal with. Is there a genotype by environment interaction? And I feel that unless I'm shown otherwise, that varieties that are developed for, let's say, a conventional ag system, they ought to be just fine under an organic ag system. And I'm not aware that, I know there's a couple of papers I've seen out there that suggest otherwise, but I'm not sure I really buy into that. So having said all that, right now, Ardent Mills, which is a big partner of ours and partner with Colorado Wheat and so forth, they're really interested in ramping up organic wheat production. But I speak to producers about this, and those are the ones who I really go to first for feedback on how's this going to work on your farms, and the ones that I interact with are struggling with that too. So I don't know if I've answered your question about that, but those are some of my perspectives on that.
So I think I'm double dipping, but that's, no, we're on. I think I'm double dipping a little bit. This is a question for Francesca. I was very interested in your comments about soil carbon, and I'm intrigued with that. Let's suppose that soil carbon throughout the entirety of the United States were to double magically overnight. Would that be a good thing? Would that be a bad thing? Are there things about having too much soil carbon, or is it always a good thing?
So one thing that there is a
carrying capacity for carbon as well in soils. And so not all the carbon in the soil is the same, and there is one part of the carbon that is the one that is persisting, that is stabilized on minerals, and since minerals are finite, also the carbon capacity of stabilization is finite. On the other hand, you can accumulate as much carbon as you want, more in particulate organic matter or in forms that are not stabilized. And for that, and so as I see it from the perspective also of the ecosystem services, you want in the soil organic matter that turns over so that release the nutrients for plant growth, right? You don't want also to only to accumulate carbon and this carbon never do anything. You want an healthy soil is a soil where the microbes do decompose the organic matter and release the nutrients and cycle that component at the same time as you have the storage of what is more stable and represent, if you want, the capital of the soil, what we need to keep in there so that if over a dry year, there is a higher capacity to sequester, to retain the water, and it's the soil that gives a lot of the opportunity to adapt to a lot of the stress coming from climate change. And so you can't accumulate carbon forever. There is a capacity in soils, but we now know better of what kind of management we need to do to accumulate the right amount of carbon so that we can at the same time sequester as well as provide the ecosystem services that decomposition gives. And that has a lot to do also with knowing our soils from a pedologic perspective, a chemical perspective, because you can accumulate if you have so much iron or if you have so much clay content and what kind of clay you have there. So it's all fitting together, but for sure you can't accumulate carbon forever, and you need nitrogen to do that.
I just had a question for Scott. CRISPR's been in the news a lot lately, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, if you saw that playing a role in plant breeding or in your lab specifically.
Yeah, boy, that's really an exciting technology. And it is in the media a lot these days. For those of you who aren't familiar with CRISPR, Cas9, first let me just say at the outset, I'm not the expert in this. That would be Stephen Pierce who would really know. And there's others in this room, I think. But this is a way of creating new mutations in the genome of a crop plant that may have some value, herbicide tolerance or nitrogen efficiency, some sort of production or human health related trait. So this isn't something that I would be doing in my project. I would perceive our role in applied cultivar development as taking the products from that, putting them into varieties that then have all the other productivity and quality and pest resistance traits that are needed out on the farm. The big thing that I see with CRISPR Cas9 is how is that going to be regulated globally as well as within the U.S. And I saw a comment, it was just the other day, I forgot who made it, something on Twitter, but someone commented, will science be allowed to help ag feed the 9.7 billion people? And I think that was really fitting. And let me just go on record as saying I think it'll be a real shame if that's not allowed to occur with regards to CRISPR and Cas9.
I have a question about, you guys talked about integrating everything together. And I know this is more about the production part. But what is the effort of the department, or if there is any other department on campus or nationally, working towards the post-production part, the harvesting and incorporating new technologies to improve that area, which is also a big area of where a lot of resources are lost that never make it to the market or to a table?
Yeah, I can't speak to that directly, but I will say that that's a key component that gets highlighted if you do something like life cycle analysis, right? Where you understand and you quantify the relative impacts of those different steps along the supply chain. So I think if we build that capacity, it will reemphasize where those needs are to focus the efforts. And food waste, both in the field and post-field, is a huge area of need. So I think that's a future resource area that life cycle analysis would help us identify where those and quantify where those challenges are. Anybody else have? Yeah.
A lot from you about putting the right input in the right place at the right time. If you were in college administration and you wanted to see the future, this is not fair because we didn't pose it to everybody else, but what is the right input at the right place at the right time to make us a preeminent university in agriculture? Not really fair, is it? I worry about this a lot at night.
Yeah, I think that for the areas that we highlighted, at least in our department, some might need more capacity in terms of personnel, but other might need more support in terms of either infrastructure or I really like the seed grant concept. To be honest, I built my biochar program out of it wasn't the Energy Institute, what was before then, the collaboratory. So I think that a lot of what we can get from the upper administration are tools to make us more competitive to go out there, because all what I highlighted are areas that do have a lot of interest. So from us, you know, besides the scholarly excellence, we also have to identify where opportunities are and where we can really move forward with our impacts, but also enlarging our, you know, we all need resources to do the work we do. And so I can see that sometimes even opportunity like this, like coordinating and knowing what you do and what I do, and so if I see a new call, I know who to contact, and I know that maybe here at CSU there are great opportunities for that. So that's something that for sure is coming more and more from you guys in the college, maybe from the VPR, organizing these groups to have people talking about the Nexus, for example, has been a good opportunity. We do have some great infrastructure in some areas, not necessarily in all. So maybe look at what kind of support we can get to make. Also, I had a point about analytical facilities. For sure, more and more now in this large data things is becoming computing. But many of us do work and live in labs as well as field facilities. And so that also cost a lot and cost a lot to maintain, and we all do service to make them sustainable, but it's hard to compete with other universities where those labs, for example, are subsidized. So identify, you know, it's a cocktail of things that make us competitive, and not everybody is missing, you know, each of us might be missing a different part of the cocktail. And so really identify where those needs are and have those discussions, because that's where they come from. I don't know if I answered your question.
Four people, maybe four different answers. One of the things that I think we need to remember in this is how much. I mean, how big is the bet? Is it $50,000? Is it $50 million? That has a big bearing on how that would be optimally spent. I tried to make the case today, and I'd make it again right now, that for us at the university here to make a decision about our future as a university without the stakeholder right there, sitting right there next to us as a partner in that process, I really think we'd be missing something. And we can leverage with, a stakeholder means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, clientele, whatever you want to call it, but they can bring a lot of resources to the table too that we don't even think about here at the university. So that's what I would advance as maybe one part of that, is engage them. What's important to them? And in that process, as those priorities are being set.
One thing as we were putting this together that I kept thinking is the role of the land grant. And so thinking about where where we have responsibilities and opportunities that the private industry isn't providing. For example, in terms of transparency and decision support tools, or whether it's public plant breeding. So figuring out what those key points are where we as a land grant can partner with industry, can partner with stakeholders, but what do we offer that other entities aren't offering? And I think that I think we've highlighted some of those key areas.
This may be my personal opinion here, but no, I think that, I mean, in addition to everything my colleague said, I think that there can be a lot that we gain by investing a lot more in our students. I mean, I think that, I mean, especially graduate students are really like the workhorses of research, and we have a responsibility as, you know, capacity building, this next generation of scientists, and I think that, yeah, anything or any way that university can help in providing additional fellowships or whatever, just to make it a little easier for students to get through. And I think that would make us a lot more competitive. Just one additional thing.
Like, you know, going back to the old model of a professor that then had some funds that they could actually use for the lab, we are now seeing some of our best colleagues from the United States going back to places like Switzerland or Germany, where that model is still happening. So for sure, for all of us, you know, the funding is a huge stress and a huge time consumption, and we've write a lot of proposals to get some funded. And so like finding an epimedia where we can still, and I have been very fortunate in the past 5 years to have some donor support, even a little bit, you know, at the hard times, keep you going, and also gives you the opportunity to experience, to try the other stuff that then you can use for applying for bigger funding. So I think that some support for sure to move this program forwards, it can go a long way.
Other questions? Last chance. Okay, if not, thank you very much. And again, thank all of you.